All right, it should be live now. Hello, thank you for attending Odoo's webinar, External APIs. My name is Ala Youssef. I am a technical consultant at Odoo. I do customizations for customers here. And today I'm going to be guiding you through the usage of external APIs in Odoo. First of all, we're going to start with an introduction. Why do we use API? Why would we need to use the API, etc. Then I'm going to go through the process of communicating with Odoo. How does it work? How is it different from other systems? And then I'm going to go briefly through access and security and what kind of security concerns you would have to deal with whenever you're using the external API. And last but not least, I have a couple of demos ready for today. So why would we need to use an external API? There are multiple reasons, but most commonly we have integrations and analytics. For example, let's say you have created your own in-house e-commerce platform, or you have your own internal IT processes, and you want Odoo to play part in those processes. For example, push an additional invoice to Odoo without opening the Odoo platform. Or maybe you are training some sort of machine learning model. You could fetch the data from Odoo directly. So in general, that's why you would be using the external API, mostly automations and integrations. Integrating with Odoo, in terms of integrations, most systems would provide you with some sort of a GraphQL interface, maybe a RESTful API. Unfortunately, Odoo does not do that. Odoo provides us with an RPC endpoint, namely XML-RPC/2. You could use your favorite programming languages, built-in libraries in order to communicate with this endpoint, and you could do pretty much everything from there. Of course, in many cases, you would want to have a RESTful API. In that case, you have two solutions. You either could find a third-party application that would satisfy that. I'm pretty sure I've seen a lot of those. Maybe I've seen some of those that actually expose a GraphQL endpoint. Or you could build your own using web controllers. What's the difference between REST and RPC? REST is more popular nowadays compared to RPCs. It usually has more explicit action verbs. So whenever you want to create a person, there is a route called person. You send a post request to it, and that's it, which makes it a little bit more intuitive. But at the same time, it becomes less flexible because you will have to because you are limited to the full CRUD operations. However, in RPC, you have to know the specific procedure names. For example, there will be a procedure name called create product, create invoice, etc. And this directly means that you will require additional knowledge of the system. In other words, the better you are in understanding the basic system, the more likely, the more successful you will be in using RPCs in order to communicate. So it becomes more flexible. So RPC is more flexible, but the payoff is the fact that it is less intuitive than REST. So basically, this is how we are going to be using XML-RPC with Odoo. Many programming languages provide an XML-RPC, a set of XML-RPC built-ins, and I'm going to be using Python for this tutorial right here. The first thing you want to do is basically to import XML-RPC.client. Then you need to prepare the variables or the parameters that you need to communicate with Odoo in order to connect to Odoo, namely the DB. The DB is not going to be the commercial term that we use, the Odoo databases. No, it's going to be the SQL database that is connected to Odoo. A username and a password, and those are basically a user login and a user password, an actual Odoo internal user. And last but not least, the URL. Next, we are gonna set up some server proxies to fetch some metadata. Namely, we need the common and the models. Both of them have specific routes, as you could see here. And then you could authenticate. If you authenticate successfully, it will give you a user ID that you could be using in the rest of your transactions. Now we are ready. Everything is set. We could go ahead and start using it. And for that, you could use models.execute KW. Models, if you remember, is basically a server proxy that we have created in a previous step. Of course, execute KW takes multiple parameters. We have set those in previous steps. Model name is basically the name of the database model that you are attempting to control. Method name is any public method. We're going to talk about public methods in a second. And then method name is actually going to be a Python function. And what do Python functions take? They take either positional arguments or keyword arguments, and we could pass those as either a list in the case of positional arguments or a dictionary in the case of keyword arguments. And of course, if you wanted to add additional context, you could pass it as a keyword argument as well. As I mentioned, you can call any public methods. If you take a look at Odoo's code base, there are some methods that are prepended by an underscore. You cannot call those using XML-RPC. But typically, you will not be digging deeply through methods. You will mostly be using one of those methods, either create or write, or a flavor of the search function. Of course, as I said, RPC is usually more flexible and powerful than REST, especially in this case. But with great power comes great responsibility, so there are some stuff that you have to keep in mind while using XML-RPC. First of all, you have control over the entire API, internal API, model API from the external API. Which means if API keys or if your external applications got hijacked in some way or another, the damages could be severe. Therefore, you have to keep in mind multiple stuff. First of all, you are using the external API as an internal user as far as Odoo is concerned. Therefore, make sure that you are giving that specific user as much access as they need, not more than that. For example, if you are using the API to view products, make sure that the API user only has access to product and products only. Of course, I have shown you that we could authenticate using username and password, but like for added security, you could generate an API key on the user, and that API key could be used instead of the password. So, in the case of in the case where the API key gets leaked, you could simply delete that API key rather than having to reset the password and having to figure out where that password has been, on how many platforms you are using that password. All right. In the case of access, I think I just mentioned it. It's basically API users follow the exact same rules internal users do, so you have to keep that in mind while working on it. All right, let's get into the examples real quickly. First of all, I have two examples. One of them is written using Python, and the other one is an integration with JavaScript, since the documents do not mention JavaScript in our official website. All right, both of the examples are in this repository. It is in the description, and they're separated in different branches. All right, here is the first example. I have this Odoo database right here. If I go to accounting and partner ledger, I want to fetch this sort of data into my Python application. So I have already set a Python console right here, and I have already imported XML-RPC and pandas in order to play with the data a little bit. So if I go back to my my application here, as we mentioned before, we have to set those four parameters: the URL, the database, the username, and the password. Or instead of the password, you would have the API key if you have set that up. Of course, the URL will not match with the URL in the example. I have to make sure that it is exactly the one that I'm currently using. Like this. Now, the next thing I would want to do is to fetch the common metadata and authenticate. And then I could start setting up my command. Of course, those are account move lines, as you could see from the URL. This is the model that I am trying to target. This includes data. This is the partner ledger, so it includes data that is either payable or receivable, and it's of course only the posted data. So we set up the domain in order to accommodate for that. Let me copy it real quickly. And I could also pick up what kinds of fields I want. It really depends on your application. I added some data cleaning in order to use it with pandas, for example. And there we go. We have the data. The data is cleaned. Now let's create a pandas data frame with it, and let's take a look at it. The data has been fetched as expected. Let's see if it will match with the data from the standard solution. All right, I grouped the data by the partner and the currency, and it gave me those results which match with the backend. One of the questions that I keep getting a lot is I have created a sales order using the external API. How can I create an invoice on that sale order? The answer is there are multiple solutions, but one of them is basically using the transient model that is controlling this wizard. The transient model, is a model that makes it to the database. So I could create that transient model, and then I could pass it the context. I could pass a context to it that includes the current order in order to invoice it. Let's see how that would work. The context would include the active ID of the order. In our case, the ID is here, 21. Of course, when you do that, don't attempt to hard code the order number. Fetch it using a read method or a search method. But for now, for the sake of example, we are just going to use it as it is. So we have the context. The context is a dictionary. We have something called active model, which is the model that I'm trying to run the wizard against. And in our case, it's going to be sale.order. In addition to the active model, we have active IDs and active ID. Active ID, which is going to be 22, and active IDs, which is going to be a list containing 22. and that's our context. And then I could create the transient model, which is sale advance payment invoice, which is the transient model that controls the invoicing wizard. We have an issue here. The ID is not 22, the ID is 21 actually. And then now I have an instance of the wizard programmatically open, and using I could use that wizard in order to create the invoice. So now if I refresh my page, this sale order will have an invoice attached to it. That's it for the first example. The second example, it includes the usage of a JavaScript framework named Next.js, which uses Node for its backend. I'm not going to go through the details of the creation of this application, but I included into it a handler for the Odoo API. It is inspired by some libraries that I have seen in NPM. There are a lot of those. Yeah, so it is quite similar to XML-RPC in Python, but like you have to figure out which methods match the description. So basically I have created an Odoo object. The Odoo object will have a connect method. The connect method will communicate with common, similar to what we did in the Python example. And then I have defined my own execute KW function. And then I have integrated it within my application. My application has some routes in the back end. And I added to those routes export to Odoo, import from Odoo, and register Odoo. I encourage you to take a look at the full application. Of course, since everything in Odoo is a model, inclusive of fields and views, you could also create those from the API. So the application that I have created is a simple phone book application. It lists certain users with their phones and emails. I added the ability to register or import or export the contacts to Odoo, and of course the contacts are coming from the contacts application. For that, I have created 3 buttons. The register Odoo button, which creates a new view for the contacts and adds a new field in order to register the external API ID. Let's do just that. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Seems like the server has disconnected actually. 1 second. There we go. Yeah, now everything is connected here. All of my contacts have been synchronized between the external application and Odoo, and the external ID have been added to Odoo automatically using the register Odoo method. That's it for the second application. I would also like to remark that there are multiple libraries on GitHub and NPM that are useful for handling the Odoo API. Do give them a look. One of the most popular ones is Odoo Client Lib. All right, that's what I have for today. I will give you a couple of minutes for specific questions and answer. Saleh, the video will stay on the channel, yeah. If I use controller as API, is there a way to call my API if I have multiple databases? Okay, I cannot see why not. API for payment gateway and shipping also handled by XML-RPC. Faraz, is that a question? Is this supposed to be a question or a fact? It depends on the payment gateway, actually, in that case. Hi, are there add-ons we can use to create custom RESTful APIs on top of Odoo? Example, custom mobile application? Of course. There are a lot in the third-party store. This would require Odoo SH or Odoo on-premise at least. Or you could create your own. You could give the web controls documentation a look to see how you how you could do that. All right. I think we will not be getting any more questions. Thank you for attending today and have a good day.